1, 2, we pick it up, go!
Mankind must put an end to war. A war will put an end to mankind.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
Well, I'm not drunk. I've earned everything I got.
Change will not come if we wait for some other person.
Hey, Internet. This is Elliot. This is Blind Partisan. I'm here with Eric Drzwicki, and he's running for Brown County Board District 4.
District 4.
Yeah, good. I have a memory of about 2 seconds. I think everybody realizes that now. And I don't know. I think we're going to jump right into it. Obviously, everyone can count on me to, drill you on the sales tax issue. But I don't know. Where would you like to get started?
Yeah, I mean, we could jump right into the sales tax. I think that's it's a hot button issue. I'm kind of surprised.
Why do you say that?
Well, I think that it comes from a bunch of different angles. You can talk to some of the candidates even for council, and there is a perspective that the city didn't do very well on the overall investment of where the sales tax is being spent, despite the fact that the city is going to be paying a very significant portion of that sales tax. So from an equity standpoint, the people who are paying the tax maybe aren't the ones that are most directly reaping the benefits of the tax. There are some more fringe positions which I wouldn't take, such as taxation is theft and stuff like that, which I think goes a little too far.
We're done here. Taxation is theft. It is theft.
Without representation.
Okay.
Taxation without representation is
sales
theft.
tax, you don't get representation.
And I think there are some concerns with the sales tax where the representation is not even close to proportionate. And I think that definitely does bring some concerns. I think another area of concern is, and I know that the logistics were a little different, but when I've gone door to door, people have said, if it was good enough to trust us to vote on the sales tax when it was the Packers, and that was, although it was a closer vote than anticipated, most people thought it was a sure bet people were just going to vote for the Packers. Then when it's less of a sure thing, why do you not trust us to have the final say? And I think that that's a good question.
You mean the voters up for referendum?
Right, the voters offering them a referendum. That doesn't mean, we suddenly stop the wheels of democracy and every time we want to do something, we put it to a referendum. But if there's a bit of a pattern there and the public feels like this is the type of thing that they should have input on, then it's not a good PR move. It's not a good feeling for the populace that we're saying, hey, we don't trust you to make this choice, so we're going to be the nanny state, and we'll make the decisions for you because we know best. And so I think that bears some thinking about just the style and methodology of how we are running our local government.
So, a couple things there. So I think the reason we don't just get rid of representation and have referendums for everything is because a lot of issues have more complexity than a yes or no vote, right? And they're not concise. This is pretty concise. Should we have a sales tax or not?
Right.
So I actually think every time that there's a tax increase of that sort, it should be a referendum. Without fail. I almost feel like that should be we have state laws on how much you can increase, without going to referendum and all that. Like this feels like we're sidestepping regular taxes.
Right. And I do think that's a good point. And that's really what the position of the most of the people that have gone door to door is they felt like, I probably would have voted for it because I do think we've got to deal with the debt issues. I do want to make sure the Neville's funded, the libraries are funded, but I object to the fact that my vote was skipped. And I think at the end of the day, it should be our job, if we're in local government as the representatives, it should be our job to create a sellable proposal, to say, hey, here's what we're going to do with the money, and now we trust you to vote on it, trust us, the voters, to vote on it. And I think there are some reasons why this didn't happen in this case, and one of them is that it disproportionately doesn't go to the people who are the ones that are primarily paying the tax.
So what do you mean by that?
Well, there's just a lot of investment outside of the Green Bay area. A big one, and I come from Pulaski, so trust me, I bear no ill will. But growing up, I went to the Pulaski Library like every Saturday to play Oregon Trail, just, dating myself a bit. And I feel like, hey, a lot of our expenses going in that direction, that's not where the sales tax is primarily coming from. That's not where the receipts are coming in. But if a larger than proportionate spending is going there, then I don't think that is fair to the people that are paying the majority of it. And I think that's something that voters would have questioned had it been a referendum. And it might be a reason why it wasn't put to a referendum, because those questions didn't have good answers.
So are you saying that that's the case now, or that's the proposed case that Pulaski will have more spending than Green Bay?
Well, I think that not that Pulaski would have more, proportionate to their taxes paid, they'll be getting a better end of the deal. And I think that is, as on paper, that's one of the big concerns. And that's been brought up by some of the other candidates in the city elections, is that, hey, we should have fought harder, even on maybe the council talking to the board. And love them or hate them, the mayor has definitely expressed concern about the deal that the city has got on how much they're not getting, if you will, from the sales tax expenditures.
So how would you, are you for the sales tax or against it?
When it comes to it, I think at the end of the day, we had to do something. The debt is definitely becoming an issue. I would say I oppose the way it happened. I'm not opposed to the concept that something needed to happen. But I think that when you put it to a referendum, which I would do support, that it forces you to refine your ideas and your proposals more to be able to clear a public vote. And so I would say that I oppose the tax as it went through, but not the idea that a tax needed to go through at some level. And this really maybe hits a broader spectrum of the picture. Our neighbors, our neighboring counties, make us pay those sales taxes when we go there. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of the day, it is only fair that we return that favor when they're visiting us. But it still comes down to trusting the voters to make that final decision and coming up with a proposal that would get that to be a yes. And I'm not so sure. This proposal might have been close.
So lots of questions on that. So just something that kind of just occurs to me that what would be wrong with having just increasing the state sales tax to 5.5 and getting rid of all these county taxes across the board? If Milwaukee wants to have one because they want to charge 100% or whatever, let them do that, fine. But if all of the other counties, because our county people have made this argument before that everybody else is doing it, so we should too. And I just feel like we have too many different types of taxes, and it's too complicated. So then the average person, I think this trickles down into this powerlessness and disconnect that we all feel, all the way to the point where, it's not the cause, but kids are shooting each other in schools because they just feel powerless and they don't know what to do and they feel trapped and all sorts of things. That it's not just this, but this disconnect between the representatives and the voters and even non-voters, just students and citizens.
It leads to non-voters, I think, a lot of times, because at the end of the day, when you've got something that is maybe too complex to make sense, you start to not want to be interested in that topic anymore. If you're trying to maybe learn a new computer program and you just can't find a way to figure it out, sometimes you'll just switch to a new program altogether rather than keep plodding through that. And I think that can happen if we're not constantly working with voters to try to make the process transparent, but not just transparent. There's no good in having the words legible if the sentences don't make sense. So we need to make sure that both are accomplished.
I love that. That's great. I'm going to use that.
Well, hey,
so that in programming, I had a student in my class who his program validated, but that doesn't mean it does what it's supposed to do. So well put. So I think about when I go to Milwaukee or especially Chicago. Our hotel when we were in Chicago was right across the street from this downtown Walmart, people were pushing for to have it in Green Bay, and there were 12 different taxes. And I don't know how an average person, I'm pretty plugged in, you're very plugged in. I would have no idea, and I wouldn't know who to go to ask, and like there's just, it's like it just feels sneaky. It feels dirty.
It is. I think a lot of times it's one of those things like when you look on your phone bill, and you've got a bunch of different things, and they nail you on a bunch of different things because you don't bother to read the fine print, and at the end of the day, you just look at the total. And a lot of times we just accept that. And I think at the end of the day, it really comes to we can do better. We can have a more simple code. It does necessarily take a lot of work with the state, but I'm kind of a middle of the road guy. But with our current government being pretty one-sided at the state level, hopefully that would be easier to accomplish than normal. In general, the right side of the aisle argues for simplifying the tax code, and that's where you'd say, well, then earn your pay, earn the votes that you've been given by doing that. Kind of put up or shut up. And I think that's something we should definitely encourage. If you've got local officials pushing the state level people, that can make a big inroads on maybe getting some of these solutions.
Okay, so you're kind of in favor. You're in the middle. I think I sort of am too. I feel like it's kind of dirty tactics, but I recognize we need some money. But okay, what do we need the money for?
Well, talking to people, and a lot of people in my district actually either work with or know somebody that works with either the Green Bay libraries or the Neville. I think that some of these things are large assets that we already have. And so if you don't properly invest in them, then it's wasted capital. So I'm not a big proponent of tax and spend, but at the same time, I'm not a proponent of wasting capital we have. I do think that a lot of that money could actually work hand in hand with city needs, especially if because the city is part of the county, and a lot of the things that the voters in Green Bay want that sales tax to go to are things that the county's not interested in. They kind of just say, well, the city can take care of that. The city can take care of that. So I think...
like an example of something like that?
Well, roads are a big one, and I think that, and I know you don't want to get into the wheel tax, but I think that sometimes there is this level of voter burnout from new taxes. And so when the county pushes this through quickly, then regardless of the merits, wheel tax almost becomes impossible by default because people are like, are you kidding me? They have a sales tax and now we still don't have money for the roads because people don't put, that city and county are divided on that. And so then, no, we're not doing a new tax, and...
Right. So to those of us that are plugged in, I think some of these issues seem, there's more of a correct answer, right? But I'm saying they because I keep kind of pushing back on these things. I feel like there's not enough clarity in that. Okay, what is the sales tax for? You mentioned some debt, so the county has some debt, and you mentioned the museum and the library.
And there's Expo, of course.
Okay, so what's the deal with the Expo? What do we need all the money for?
I would argue that the Expo is probably not as needed as we think it is. Again, this is going back to my constituents and also talking to people that, some that work at the Crest, that we say, hey, we've got a lot of facilities as it is. And by spending all this money here, we're kind of creating a competing good, not a good that works and fills a void. It's a good that competes with other areas that are already being covered.
Right.
And so I think a big critique on the tax really does go to how needed is the Expo? Is the Expo needed as much as we're going to be inevitably spending on it?
And okay, so and you don't have to get the exact numbers, but roughly, what are we talking for that? And what is it? What is the Expo?
Well, so historically, the Expo had been. It's been a long time since we've really had it utilized. There's a lot of things like farm shows. I don't know if they did rodeos, or I think you're
talking about the current Brown County Arena,
right? The Brown County Arena,
Shopko Hall.
Yes.
Okay.
And I know that there's this desire to kind of push this further or expand it, improve it. But at the same time, we have a lot of other, areas that we can use for similar events. It's what it would be improved for, and I don't know hard dollar numbers. I know that it's a very significant portion. It's not just a small part. But I know that, when it comes to, I mean, those are really the main categories: is Debt Expo, Library, and Neville. So I would say that I'm not too sure that the goals for the expo meet some sort of unmet need would be the real question. Is there something that you're going to be able to do that you really couldn't otherwise?
Okay, so if we don't, let's say somehow we shut this sales tax down somehow, which there's lawsuit involved with the Taxpayer Association, so there's a chance that it could be shut down. What happens then? So the current arena and Shepko Hall stay status quo. They get ripped down.
Well, it would actually it'd have to depend on some of our commitments that we're already making, because now that we went with the sales tax has been in for more than 2 months already. There's a lot of moving parts, and so that would require some legal experts to say, all right, we're going to have to look at what we're contractually obligated to, what we've already committed to with these renovations and improvements. Honestly, it would require scrambling on the behalf of the board to say, listen, we're going to have to find something fast, because otherwise it could cause additional expenses just due to maybe contractual obligations where we've already promised certain things. So I kind of hope it doesn't get overturned, not because I don't have reservations as to how it happened, but I kind of feel like you're taking poison to kill a sickness, which I don't think that's necessarily good for us at this point.
I love your analogies. So I guess I kind of feel that way too. I mean, I see the potential downside, but I also feel like, so there were some people on the county board that kind of put us into this situation, and we're sort of rewarding bad behavior. So that's sort of a bummer. So I heard when the Taxpayer Association guys were here, they mentioned, I don't know, some astronomical figure for a new morgue. Apparently that's on the list. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Well, and a lot of the projects are not set in stone, which is kind of the beauty of the system, is the vagueness. A lot of supervisors have actually touted, well, we don't have for certain numbers on any of this stuff, as their way of refuting whenever numbers are thrown around. And to me, that gets back to the lack of transparency. When there's plausible deniability for any sort of expense that a taxpayer group wants to bring up, well, that's not good. That, we should have this stuff. I'm not saying it has to be bedrock, 10 Commandments level in stone, but it should at least be on paper. At least have a good amount of it. So
when you're talking to constituents, I assume you're knocking doors and doing all the things, right? So what do you hear from constituents?
Well, with the sales tax, like I've said, it goes back to the referendum. They wish it would have been a referendum. Another thing that I hear is a common concern, and this is something that really was my motivation for running. It's just the feeling that currently Brown County is a pretty purple county. And even my district is a little left of center, but more purple than it is any other color. And at the end of the day, people want purple type of representation.
So when you say purple, I think I know what you mean.
Centrist or moderate, somebody that's willing to work across the aisle. They don't want you to be necessarily blind to your own beliefs, but they don't want you to be sitting out there as a blind partisan.
Thank you. All right. He should have a handheld mic so he can just mic drop, right? So you totally threw me off where I was going with that now. So purple representation.
Yes.
Centrist. I mean, people like classify me as like some radical libertarian person, but I actually feel like that describes me. I feel like I'm a purple person. Maybe you're a purple person. Maybe you're left of center, right of center. But people want people more in the center. They don't want these argumentative extremes.
Right.
And so this is what you're hearing when you're out and about?
It is. And I think people want their local governments to work the way that neighbors work together. We may have different yard signs in our yards, but at the end of the day, if there's a crime problem on our block, we're not saying, well, I'm not going to ask that neighbor for help because he voted for Trump or she voted for Hillary. Right. We work together and get solutions. And sometimes it's a drawback if you know that your representative is actively working on national or high state level hard left or hard right politics, because then it's like, well, I'm not sure I can really go to them because we identify differently. And I noticed on their Facebook, they're attending this rally, and that doesn't have much to do with our county. And there's that concern that people have that, hey, we view things differently politically, and they don't seem accessible because of how far off they are in one corner.
Okay, so I tend to oversimplify a little bit when I'm talking to all the folks from the city. I say roads are probably the most important thing, followed closely with police, fire, garbage pickup, water, and then some other things, right? So where do you view, like, what's the hierarchy of responsibilities for the county?
Sure. Well, I think number one, the county has to be responsible to the needs of the county as a whole. But in a democracy, you do need to look at, all right, who is paying the county largely, who is funding the county government, and are those monies that the county is collecting, are they going to where it's being collected from? I do think there are some larger level development needs that the county could look at. I've talked to supervisors about the fact that you have the corner of Pulaski and St. Augustine and Pulaski has pretty much never been dealt with after the huge fire. When the bowling alley burned down. And I bowled there as a kid, and it's kind of heartbreaking to see communities have areas that are pretty much just undeveloped, being wasted. And we could talk about the development needs near UWGB and the fact that we have a huge amount of young people that are not willing to stay home or stay at school over the weekends because there's nothing near GB or not enough near GB. And the county can definitely look at that sort of thing. I think that there's a lack of working with the city. And that's something that I've heard from people running for council, is that they wish that people that are on the county would realize, hey, this is where your money is coming from, but it's not where it's going.
But there's some overlap. We have some people that are on city council and on county board. So I think the hope would be that those people would be our conduits.
Well, and I think it should be county board members also that are representing city wards and city districts. Because if you're on the county board and you're saying, I'm going to tax the people in my district, but then I'm going to put a majority of that tax at another area of the county, I don't think you're well representing your wards, your district. So,
in terms of the county, though, you mentioned some spots. Those spots change over time, but it's inevitable that if you're going to make some investments, it's going to be in one thing,
right,
or a few buckets. So, a certain amount that is sort of impossible to avoid, isn't it?
It is. I would say that a good way to remedy that is to have a guaranteed level of investment that really hits at the people who are paying the taxes. So in Green Bay, there should be a guaranteed level of investment. That doesn't mean we take all the money and pre-designate it, but we say, hey, here's a baseline. I think that there could be county help for roads that overlap, more so than there is now. Obviously, it's become a big enough issue that it's become a liability to the taxpayers. It's caused more expenses than it would normally cause if we had dealt with it properly. And it affects our districts. So that's where county supervisors can speak up and say, hey, if we're going to be doing this tax, we should deal with some of the most immediate needs of our area. And not just say, well, we'll push that to the city solely, because it doesn't have to be that way. You can look in other areas in the state, and counties have worked with local municipalities on roads. It's not something that you just say, segregate it, split it, nothing to do with it. So that would be one area that I say it's untapped.
So we're almost out of time. So I'm going to just quickly kind of recap. So on the sales tax, and I'm sorry to make the whole thing about the sales tax basically, but so we have these cornerstone properties, the libraries, the museum. The other thing that people are sold on for the use of the sales tax is the jail, the county jail. And we just renovated that. We just built this whole big thing. The surrounding counties don't have such a problem with this. So it makes me feel like we're locking too many people up.
You know what? Criminal justice reform is definitely a big issue. Unfortunately, a very high amount of that is state level. You know,
So why do we have more than Appleton does?
a lot of times it's because we get asked to do the housing and we just say, yeah. There's transfers. You know, we take on a lot of population in our prisons in our area that, you know, we shouldn't necessarily have to. And I think there is something to do about profiting from it, and you know, and the employment and the fact that there are jobs to be had there. And so sometimes we just jump all over that.
So there could be a view that we should build this, and then we'll have empty space that we can fill with others instead of sending others to other places.
Right. And so I know some people look at it as more jobs, you can have more employees working, and we get the money from housing the individuals. But I think that it's the wrong angle of looking at the problem. You know, we should be doing more as a county to reduce the amount of necessitated lockups. You know, we can definitely push back and say to other municipalities or other people that are trying to move prisoners here and say, hey, you know, we're going to stick with what we have. And there are other locations, I think, that I think it's the Milwaukee area that has some space that doesn't get filled up often. I'm not sure if it's Milwaukee, but something in the southern area that had one too. So I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we're kind of out of time. Jacob gave me I think he wants to kill me sign. And actually, I think he's sleeping. That's kind of weird. I can't help it. It's the county. It's sales tax. What do you want from me, man? So we have election coming up. When is that?
Election is the Tuesday after April 3rd. Tuesday after Easter, April 3rd.
Okay.
And definitely would encourage people to get out and vote. District 4 actually doesn't have the greatest turnout. You can look at past election data, and it just seems like regularly, time and time again, it's got less voters than other districts.
So if people would like to get in touch with you or find out more about you, how would you like them to do that?
Sure. A couple easy ways. Eric_DRZ at Hotmail. I check my email regularly throughout the day. I'm also on Facebook. You can add me either my private or my personal accounts or my campaign accounts. Either one is absolutely great.
Okay. That's all we got. Make sure to join me in the conversation where I guess I'm going to have a one-on-one debate with some of our county board people about the sales tax. So join me on the Blind Partisan community on Facebook, and go to YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Super important. Jacob wants me to always say that. Right, Jacob? And otherwise, please tell other people about the show. Don't forget to vote on April 3rd, and that's all I got. Thanks. Bye.